So welcome to everybody here at Oriel Science. Welcome to our worldwide audience. Good to see people tuning in, that's great. Julia Lockhart is Associate Professor at University of Wales, Trinity St David's at the Swansea College of Art. And my name's Mark Blagrove and I'm a Professor of Psychology at Swansea University. So we have teamed up, teamed up for quite a few years, but we've teamed up also for Julia to produce those paintings which are on the other wall. And okay, so in March 2020 we heard reports of increased levels of dream reporting because of COVID. Partly because of people having a very emotional time, and also partly because some people were able to have longer in bed and remember their dreams in the morning, which meant they had longer rapid eye movement sleep, which helped to produce their dreams, and they had time to discuss their dreams with each other. So that seemed to occur. There's been a load of scientific papers now saying, yes, people dreamt more often and the dreams were really quite emotional. Now, since 2016, Julia and I have had a project going where I discuss people's dreams with them while she paints them simultaneously. And we started off with Julia taking about 20 minutes to paint them, but we've now moved up to about 90 minutes. So each of the paintings over there has been done in 90 minutes. And in April 2020, what happened was what we decided to do was, we couldn't do any of these events anymore, and so we thought we'd do them online. So on Facebook Live, which is what we're using at the moment as well, we started talking to healthcare workers from around the world. We'd get them to tell a dream. We'd discuss the dream with them, and while they discussed the dream, Julia would paint the dream. And so the audience we had, which was from California to Europe to Australia, they would be able to listen to the discussion, they'd carry on chatting with the discussion and joining in, and they'd watch the live film of Julia making the painting. And we got healthcare workers and key workers for this from Britain and around the world. So Julia's going to quickly say what method we use for discussing the dream, and I'm the person that would do the discussion, and Julia would paint the dream while the discussion was going on. And this discussion method, Julia described.
Yeah. So though the artworks, so I can't see you if I'm looking through my glasses, though the artworks are painted onto Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, which is the sort of starting point for how I make the painting. So I use the paragraphs in the book to find shapes that match the narrative of the dream. And though they're painted in Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, what we actually use is the Ullman dream technique. And I'm just going to explain that now. So it's got 5 stages basically. So the first stage is the reading of the dream aloud by the dreamer. And Montague Ullman just did this once, but we tend to do it 3 times because there's sometimes quite a lot of detail, and if I don't know the dream ahead of time, I can't take it all in, and I'm trying, there's so many things going on in the picture that it's very difficult to take it in. So we do that 3 times, which slows the whole process down dramatically. Then we do a clarification of the dream by the worldwide audience will post questions in, and then Mark will ask those questions from them, and questions that he's thought of as well. Next, there's a brief discussion of the dream by a group member. So a member of the group will read back what they thought the dream said and put the dreamer in the 3rd person, and then they will they will say what it would be like if it was their dream, if they experienced the dream themselves. So they put it into their own perspective. So if it was me, if I was dreaming about a car that couldn't go up a hill, because of my circumstances, it would mean this. So they would put it into their own, but you have to control that bit because that can take over. And then they talk about it in terms of their own lives, and then the dreamer would be given time to respond to that. And then finally, the dreamer would give a response to that and their waking life and what it means to them with their waking life. And then someone reads the dream back. Sorry, I got that into the wrong place. And then there's a section where all members of the group suggest connections between waking life and the dream narrative. Okay, did you want to speak?
Shall I do that? Oh, okay, good. So what we do is we've got this special method which gets the details of the dream, the details of the person's waking life, and then we map them together. So we try and make sense of the dream. And while that's being done, which we usually do in about 90 minutes, Julia is painting the dream. And the reason that we get Julia to paint the dream is so that the person can be given a work of art afterwards, and they can hang it at home, and they can then discuss the dream with their family and friends, and also discuss the artwork with their family and friends. And we've done this at various places. We've done this at Freud Museum London, which is Freud's house where Freud lived in 1938 to 39 in London. So we've done it with large audiences there. That's a painting of Julia at the Paris Institute of Advanced Studies. We had a whole load of scientists there, and one of them told a very personal dream for herself, which was really interesting. And we've done it there. We've done it in Los Angeles. This was a flying dream that Julia painted. Julia mentioned that she paints it, rather than just onto a blank canvas, she paints it onto pages of Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, because it's such an interesting book. And she manages to incorporate words which are on the page into the artwork. And so this one, which happened to be about a flying dream, there's loads of references to flying on the page just by chance, which makes the artwork really quite special, that the person hasn't just told their dream, they've discussed it, they've got a work of art, but the work of art refers back to Freud by the use of words that he said. We also recently did a collaboration with the Sigmund Freud Museum, Vienna, which is where Freud lived in Vienna until 1938. And we had 2 dreams that were told by a patient of Freud, and Julia painted those dreams while we discussed those. We in fact even managed to get the patient, we managed to get the great-granddaughter of the patient to be involved in the discussion. And this is a BBC Science broadcaster, Marnie Chesterton. She came to the sleep lab, and she told us a dream in which her brother was killed. In real life, he wasn't killed. In real life, he's alive. But she dreamt of him being killed and of her comforting him. And that's how the artwork looked for her when we went to the BBC to give it to her. Right. So we've been doing that since 2016. And the interesting thing we found was that we felt a lot for the people who were telling the dreams. You know, we didn't quite expect this. We thought they would enjoy telling the dream. They'd get something out of the process. They'd get maybe some insights about themselves. But instead what we found, as well as that, what we found was that Julia and I were often listening to the person and really getting some understanding about their life. And sometimes this was an incredibly poignant experience. And so we wondered whether dream sharing could cause empathy between people. And so we ended up doing some experiments, not to do with the painting process yet at the moment, but we did some experiments in which we got students and other people to tell their dreams to each other. Each pair of people we gave them a questionnaire to say how much empathy they have towards the other person, how much they understand the other person, how much they put themselves in the other person's shoes, how much they appreciate the other person's circumstances. Do they understand the other person's emotions around things? And what we found was that we got people scoring each other, scoring that, you know, how do I feel about this person? And they said, how do they feel about the other person? Then we got one of them to share a dream with the other person and discuss it. And what we found was that the person who discussed the dream and listened to the dream had an increased amount of empathy towards the person who told them their dream. So they started to put themselves in the shoes of the other person and understanding more about them. And so in this experiment, the person who shared the dream didn't have an increase in empathy towards the person who discussed their own dream. So that's, as you might expect, they're busy sharing it. They're not going to focus on the other person, but listening to somebody else's dream helps you, and discussing it, using the technique that Julia described earlier, helps to give you perspective about the other person's life. We even published it in a scientific journal. This is a table from the journal in which we've actually accurately measured how much empathy the person had before and after the dream sharing. And we published it in a scientific journal called Frontiers in Psychology. And you can Google it and it will find that link. We've also now replicated this, so we've done another experiment where we get pairs of people sharing a dream with each other, and the person who hears the dream and discusses it has more empathy towards the other person. And we wonder that it's a little bit like telling a story to somebody else. And sometimes when you hear a story or see a film, you can really feel for the characters. And that seems to be similar to dreaming. Okay, so that had been what we'd been doing all along. That's the sort of theory behind it and experiments that we did as a result of it. And then the lockdown happened and we realised that we couldn't do any more of these events. Much as we were going to go to Japan, we got that booked in for events in Japan. And everywhere was saying, nope, you've all got to stay at home. So we very quickly learned how to use what we're on here now, which is Facebook Live. And with Facebook Live, what happens, what you do is you just point the camera at something and it films you and it puts it up on the internet, and anybody in the world can just click on the DreamsID Facebook page and see what's going on. And it tells you how many people. So we've got 3 people worldwide listening in. And now that's what we did, and Julia produced 10 paintings as a result. So would you like to, so Julia's going to talk about, we've got 9 here, and she'll tell you in a moment how come we've ended up with 10.
Yeah.
But here are these.
So, yes, as Mark was saying, when the pandemic started, we I don't know whether you remember this, but it was on the news and everybody was talking about, you know, the increase in dreaming. And we decided that we'd got this this idea of dreaming, drawing into Freud's book. So why didn't we work with key workers and doctors and sort of try and see if we could get people to be more empathic about what they were going through? Because obviously there was a lot of strange discussion that it wasn't really happening and there wasn't really a pandemic and things like that. So we thought it could be really helpful for doctors and nurses and key workers generally to talk about their dreams with other people and have other people understand how the pandemic was affecting them. So the first one we did was this one, which was a dreamer had a dream about a funeral preparation kit, having heard recently that a friend of a friend had died. This kit was what the person dreamt about, with an old style Nokia telephone in it, and ping pong bats and ping pong balls and being in a room with a kind of a very difficult to get out and negotiate the room and get out through the door, and the wife bringing this kit to him. The second one was a nurse who had COVID, and this one, which you can see is the second one up there. She dreamt about being in a party, and this was a recurrent dream. She's a nurse in Swansea, and she's told us that this was a recurrent dream, but it changed to do with circumstances. And she's found that since doing this with us, the dream has not returned, which is a really interesting thing, because she's had it recurrently over years. And there's always a man in the dream who knows what's happening, and she's always entering a party and trying to tell the people that there's something coming, there's something fearful coming, and she's got to tell them, and none of them are listening to her. And then there's a man who's kind of like, yeah, I understand, but, you know, what can we do about it? You know, not really reacting to her, and she's quite panicky. And then at the end of the dream, she ends up in a hospital ward with watching a dead man who had a breathing apparatus over his face, and she had a cat on her own face, and then woke up, and of course she had COVID and was finding it very difficult to breathe, and was isolated in one room in the house. And that was her mother over there, who'd passed away quite soon before, and she had the cat on her lap. So this was the scary outside and the tiny character and the huge door that she finds herself looking at, this kind of strange forest that's frightening her, and she knows something outside is very frightening, and she cannot communicate it. This was another doctor who we were put in contact with on the internet, and she's actually followed us since, isn't she, on Twitter? And she is a microbiologist, actually, isn't she? Microbiologist, and she just dreamt that she was finding the cure for COVID, and the cure for COVID was in these quail's eggs, tiny quail's eggs. And here she is in her little on-call bathroom, which is her office. And this is her opening the eggs with her blue gloves on, and trying to find the cure for COVID. This is another doctor who was sped through the process. He was only just qualified, and they got him through very quickly, and he was straight onto the wards to deal with COVID. So he had this kind of, in his real life, that was what was happening, and then he was with his girlfriend, and in the dream they had this child, and he went up into this sort of cave, and we realised that the cave was in Nottingham. He'd been rushed in to this area of Nottingham, and Mark knew this pub that was in a cave in Nottingham, and he said, oh yes, that's the space. So those things were quite interesting about that. I'm not actually focusing on the words. You can have a look at the words up there, but there are words such as, over here it says wife, girl, him, and together, the two, dream. So he was kind of with his girlfriend, wasn't he? And they were, you know, together. And here, dreams, narrow, commonest dream between the narrow, steep assistance attributed to the interpretation. And he said he was kind of walking through this grove, olive grove, really low down trees, and so we talked about what that might be about in his everyday life. This was another person who'd had COVID, and she was dreaming about a man coming to get her in this house, and she shouldn't have been in the house, and there was this cheeky monkey that she was chasing after, and the monkey turned into a kind of object, and she was brushing and cleaning the object. Yeah. And this one was a guy who contacted us from America, actually. That's the third one along there. And he was a delivery worker. And he had this dream about not being able to get this car, which was a Mazda, a small Mazda, up this hill. And he was banging into white garage doors. And he said, oh, it was this horrible brown colour. It was not a colour I would have chosen for a car. And then somebody in the audience said, oh, that's the colour of UPS. And he was going, oh, gosh, yeah, UPS. I've never worked for UPS. And we were talking about being a delivery driver and how you know, what that's like to carry on. And these two characters were kind of watching him. Yes. And then this one was a woman who had been caring for key workers. Both her daughter and her husband. Her husband was a chef, and her daughter was working in an old people's home, and she was kind of looking after them when they got home. And this was a dream about being inside lungs, and there was a robin, and the robin was digging at these worms and picking them out of the lungs, and there was this sort of black liquid in the lungs. And it was very interesting because we also were contacted by Deirdre Barrett in America, who works at Harvard, and she published a book where there was this connection with nature that happened during the pandemic. Lots of sort of natural elements came in, and elements of bugs as well, which is an American word for illness. You know, if you've got a bug, you've got an illness. But also these elements of birds and such like. This was a woman who was a nurse in New Zealand, and she had a dream about a power shell, being stuck inside a shell and opening out and seeing this seep up, and it was very beautiful and very bright. And interestingly, the power shell, which we call abalone, don't we? But they call it a power shell in New Zealand. And I found at the centre the word power, and it was about this return to home. And she said she was from New Zealand, but she was living in Australia, and she really missed her home. And this shell was almost a symbol of home being secured and looked after. And this was kind of toward the end of the lockdown, really. This was the last one. And it was a woman on a walk and ending up at a party, which we thought was quite particular. It's the last one in the group along here as well. Quite particular, sort of almost a demonstration of the end of the lockdown. And that led us to, most recently, working with Michael Rosen. And I don't know if you've read this book, Many Different Kinds of Love. Have you come across it? No. Well, I can't recommend it enough as a text to read about somebody who had COVID right at the beginning. The beginning of the book is he was put into a coma because of the COVID, and he was looked after by lots and lots of different nurses. And this is why the book's called Many Different Kinds of Love, because they wrote to him every day and said what they'd got him to do and how they'd helped him. Maybe they'd shaved him, maybe they'd washed him, and they talked about that, and they talked about how well he was doing and how much they wanted him to pull through. And so we read this book, and we were both very moved by it, actually. And this poem here, this dream, is about Land's End. And he wrote the dream. It's lots and lots of fragments in the dream of the nurses' voices, the doctors' voices, the person who discovered the COVID at the beginning. She writes to him, his wife's voice telling other people who were caring about him what was happening, various voices, and then his own experiences and these dreams. So there's several dreams. There's about 5 dreams in the book. And this one is about Land's End, and it says, "We were at Land's End. We climbed over a stone wall. On the other side, I noticed that we were at the top of a cliff, sheer drop, hundreds of feet down. I said that I wanted to go back over the wall, but I noticed a big hole in the wall. I squeezed into it so that I could get through, but got stuck. I shouted to you," and that's his wife, "Push, Emma, push." You did, but I couldn't get through. Then I noticed that there were people walking around. It was a space like a ruined church, made suitable for visitors, with surfaced walkways. I called out to someone, "Can you pull me through?" He tried, but he couldn't. I felt so helpless, and I was worried about you, at the top of that cliff. You were still pushing. Then I called out to another person in the ruined church. He got hold of me, and he pulled me through. And this is the painting that I did in 90 minutes of that dream, but with Michael Rosen explaining, all of his waking life associations with that dream. And we just did this on Thursday, sorry. And so you've got his wife, and here in her bum it says woman, and she's pushing on his bum, and his legs are kind of hanging out. And funnily enough, there's this page 73 here, and he was 73 at the time. And these are the funny coincidences that happen a lot in the text, that things like this pop up, and I just grab them. It says, the exuberance of my waking life with individual ramifications. I'm a cunning fellow, making the dream perfectly. And he said that he felt, when he found this hole, he felt like, oh, you know, that's good, I don't have to climb it. I've found a trick way through this wall. And so he was kind of pleased about finding it. And then these are the two fellows here, and it says here two. And these two fellows are grabbing hold of his two hands and pulling him through. And of course there's the metaphor which we use when we've been ill, very ill, and we say, you know, he pulled through. And that was a metaphor that the dream was obviously bringing up for him to realise back his life. And also, he had glaucoma. And again, I found the word glaucoma, which is so bizarre in the text twice. Glaucoma. And here it says, the elderly man, obviously one eye signifies he's one-sided. And he is one-eyed like Odin. So we talked about Odin and the meanings of Odin. But they're all very serendipitous and lucky finds, you know, as you're working through the book. Because it's, I don't choose the pages beforehand, I choose the pages in the 90 minutes as we go. Oh, did you want to? What? Oh, the exhibition. Oh, yes, so this is the exhibition at the moment at the Freud Museum. These are the same images that you've got here. We've just framed them slightly differently, framed them slightly smaller and with black backgrounds, so they all look like the second one along, but slightly less background to them. And these are the dreams written underneath. So this is at the Freud Museum. The exhibition at the moment is called 1920-2020, Freud and Pandemic. And it's about the relationship between the 1920 and the 2020 pandemic, and the similarities that we had today. And Freud famously lost his daughter and the child she was carrying in that pandemic. Do you want to? Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. So, what's happened through that whole project that has produced these is that we've discussed with dream sharers their emotional responses during sleep to their waking circumstances, because what's happening is people have had an often a very difficult time because of the pandemic, but the pandemic has influenced their sleep as well, and it's influenced their dreams in their sleep. Now, the paintings, what these paintings are doing is, rather than just leaving somebody who's had a difficult dream, say, and leaving them with it, what the paintings are doing is making those dreams public. And so they socialise the dreams, so people can talk about their dreams and their nightmares. So, for example, as Julia said, the nurse who had the terrible dream of being suffocated by a cat was then able to discuss that with us. Michael Rosen, who some of you may know, he wrote the book Going on a Bear Hunt for children, and he writes lots of children's books. And but he was in a very bad situation with COVID, almost died, and to have a dream of pulling through was really quite something.
And Land's End.
And of course, being at Land's End, you know, you're at the very tip of the earth, you're just about to drop off and go off into the unknown, which is what it would have been, I'm afraid, if he had succumbed to the virus. So it was a very meaningful dream to him as well. But what we've been doing is Julie's been producing these paintings while we've been discussing people's waking life, and the paintings help people to talk about what's been going on in their minds during their sleep. Now, I'll just very briefly mention a bit of stuff about art now, unless you want to mention this bit. In the early 1920s, Julia's already mentioned that there was a pandemic then, but there was a pandemic then, there was the end of the First World War, and an art movement arose called Surrealism. And this art movement valued dreaming. And what happened in this art movement was it prioritised, it really liked the idea of people making novel associations, putting things together, either in books, literature, poems, or in films, or poetry, or art. And there's some very famous surrealist works of art. Do you want to mention what they are? It's just on the next one.
Well, they're things you may know or you may have seen before. But for example, the lobster telephone from 1936. Salvador Dali, is a key member of the group, although a difficult member. It was really set up by Andre Breton, and it really began as a poetry movement. And it's bizarre that it was one of the most all-consuming movements, because it went from sort of words and literature into art. And we tend to know Surrealism more for its art, but it was in music, it was in lots of different areas. It was quite all-encompassing. This is Magritte's painting, The Empire of Light, where he, down below it's dark and up above it's the middle of the day. It was a very similar time, and they came out of a movement called Dada as well. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to understand the misery caused by the logical linear thinking of the war. This logical way of creating machines of mass murder, mass destruction, which were things like machine guns, for example, that would just mow people down. And it was the first time really in history that machines, human man-made machines, were used against other human beings. And this seemed to be a logical, linear structure for them. So they said we must think illogically, we must think differently to that, and bring in new and different ways of thinking. There are similarities with the pandemic, but there are also similarities with how the environment is also being kind of destroyed in a very linear way now, which kind of puts us at a similar time, really, where different kinds of thinking are needed. And there are lots of surrealist exhibitions over the last few years, so it's very interesting that this is coming up. Yes, we also, you can do that.
Is that the last?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll do that. Sure. So what Julia's just mentioned is the link of all of this to art and to the art movement of surrealism, because these are quite wacky dreams that people are having, and quite sort of bizarre elements happening in them. Now, the other thing that we're mentioning as a link for all of this work is we link the sharing of dreams that people are doing and the sharing of stories as well. And we link this to human evolution. So within theories of evolution, there's a theory called Human Self-Domestication, right? Now, what this is trying to explain is, how do we, on the whole, get on with each other? Which, on the whole, humans do. You can have lots of people living together and really getting on quite well, better than chimpanzees and other things often do. And what this theory has said is, we know what's happened with cats, and we know what's happened with dogs. What's happened is, across thousands and thousands of years, humans have looked out for the cats and the dogs that have got nicer temperaments. And those ones they've allowed to mate with each other. And so cats and also dogs have become more and more domesticated. And so cats now will roll over on their backs and let you stroke them in a way that lions certainly never would have done. And dogs will roll over. They'll even waggle their tail when they come up to you, because they so much want humans to cuddle them. And that's not like wolves at all, which wolves would have eaten you. So the theory goes that cats and dogs and some other animals as well have been domesticated. So humans have preferentially bred the ones that have got the nicer temperaments, the ones that don't get angry or bite or whatever. And there's been this theory has arisen recently called human self-domestication, which says that humans have done something similar to each other. They have preferred to mate with people who've got, in a way, better temperaments, not people who are going to sort of fly off the handle all the time. Now, obviously, there's still people who'll fly off the handle all the time around, but the idea is that slowly and slowly and slowly, humans have become more domesticated. And so we've learnt how to control our emotions, we've become calmer, we've become just lower in aggression and more pro-social with each other. Now, what we're wondering is, having done all of this work, and people haven't really linked dreaming to self-domestication before. So this is the first time we've actually said this publicly, but we're writing about it at the moment. Human self-domestication holds that evolution has selected humans for being pro-social. That means, you know, sort of thinking about each other. Low in aggression and able to control one's own emotions. And so maybe the telling of stories has had a place in that, because if we all tell stories to each other, or even funny stories sometimes, that can help to bond people together. And so what we're wondering is, maybe dreaming has had a place in that evolution of humans over the last 60,000 years or so, that when people have woken up, they've said a dream to each other, and it may have just helped them explore each other's lives and explored each other's emotions. And it may have taken advantage of the fact that you're more likely to have very long dreams near the end of the night. And so cave people may have woken up and started telling their dreams to each other at a time when films, of course, did not exist. So we've just been wondering about that. That's our website. If you want to learn more about the paintings, if you want, you can see all the paintings on the website, DreamsID.com, and you can also put two fingers onto each painting and expand them, so you can actually see sometimes that there are these, just by chance, words coming into the painting as well. And that's a thank you to everybody here, and also we're getting messages from various people around the world, so which is very, very nice. And our contact can be done through the website DreamsID.com, but we're also on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook all the time. So thank you. Now we can take, and thank you all very much for coming along. And
sitting quietly.
so we're really pleased. It's really great to be here with everybody. So if anybody's got any questions, you're very welcome to. We've had one of somebody, whether we'd be willing to go. Right, okay. I shall reply to that later. Yes, no, but certainly, yes, that would be good, Mauricio. Yes. Right. Anybody got any questions, or how was all that? Or did you like the paintings? Is the other. The paintings are all up there for.
I mean, I haven't really pulled out the odd language that often comes out, but there are odd bits and pieces of language that come out of the text, which Michael Rosen described it really well, didn't he, Mark, about how, you know, when you're writing something, you're just pulling things together and making them work, and that's very much what the works do. They use his words underneath and try and make them make sense in each dream, really.
So if anyone had any questions, you're very welcome to ask, or we'll just be around anyway, and you can just sort of chat to us afterwards as well. Right. We've changed, actually. We've We've made coloured mount around each of the paintings. Maybe Julie wants to mention this. We've changed to black.
Well, yeah, well, it's all a bit trial and error all the time, isn't it? But we realised that we really like just the black backgrounds and maybe the coloured backgrounds don't particularly add very much. So.
I'll just show the audience the paintings. Right. Well, thank you all very much. But if anybody wanted to chat afterwards, you are very welcome to do so. And we're just going to click onto Facebook so that this becomes a permanent recording of the presentation, and so people can see it on the DreamsID Facebook site, if you like. Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.